Hi, y'all. I'm Lawyer Lee. Welcome to tonight's live stream. Tonight, we are diving into one of the wildest legal stories in reality TV history. How Todd and Julie Chrisley, the stars of Chrisley Knows Best, went from living large on the television screen to serving hard time in federal prison. This week, President Trump pardoned Todd and Julie Chrisley. And I do mean that. They were completely pardoned. But before we get to that, we're going to go back to where it all started, to the fraud charges, the trial, the testimony, and what convinced a jury to convict them on every count. We're going to look at what the issues were, what some of the reasons that may have been possible for an appeal. Ultimately, the Chrisleys didn't win that, but we're going to look at all of that tonight. We're going to be talking about the fake bank statements, according to the government, about emails the government said showed that the Chrisleys were doing shady things, and the government's star witness who admitted he lied under oath. So like and subscribe if you have not already, and let's get into it. Now, Todd and Julie Chrisley were the stars of Chrisley Knows Best. It was a long-running USA Network reality show that featured their wealthy lifestyle. And I had never heard of them before I started covering the case several years ago when they were convicted. But their show is hilarious. I really enjoyed their show a lot. They're very Southern, a lot of sass, a lot of larger-than-life personalities, especially Todd and his mother, who is known affectionately as Nanny Faye. Now, the whole family was on the show, including wife Julie and their children. Even a grandchild was part of the show. It ran for 9 seasons and started airing on its 10th. But behind the scenes, the feds were investigating, and a federal criminal case was brewing. Ultimately, both Todd and Julie Chrisley would land in prison with lengthy sentences. Julie got 7 years, Todd got 12. They've been in prison since January of 2023. But their daughter, Savannah, never gave up. She set out on a crusade to get them freed. And it finally paid off when she insisted they were innocent, and she petitioned for a pardon from President Trump, which was granted this week, just this week. So social media lit up with stories earlier this week that Savannah and her younger brother Grayson had received a call from President Trump that he was going to pardon their parents. And here is what Savannah said today. There was a press conference today with Savannah and with her father, Todd.
I got the call. Like I said, I was walking into the grocery store and I stopped in the parking lot. I was like, what do I do? I was like, okay, go back to my car. And so I sat in my car and had that phone conversation that's online with President Trump. And I was in such shock. I really didn't know what to say. I started crying. Grayson was with me, and we're like, oh my God, it's happening. It's happening. And I really don't remember driving home. Like, I was in such shock.
I have it on 1.25, but she's a fast talker, so that's kind of fast. Sorry for that. All right. So we're going to talk more about the pardon, about what happened maybe in a later episode. But tonight I wanted to focus on how did they wind up in prison in the first place? Like, what were they convicted of? What were the charges? What was the evidence? So if you would, as I said, be sure to like and subscribe. And I want to shout out the first 5 in tonight's chat. Dr. Go Duke Basketball. That's Doctor to all of us now. Beth A, Oklahoma GG, S Cypher, and Hal L. Now, as to how the case got started, in 2012, Todd Chrisley fired his former business partner, Mark Braddock. According to Todd, he had to fire Braddock when he discovered that Braddock had been stealing from the family. Now, Braddock had a very different story. Ultimately, he flipped the script, and later that same year, he went to the federal government and turned in the Chrisleys. So the government was very interested in what Mark Braddock had to say. They gave him immunity, meaning they promised him that he would not be prosecuted for anything that he said or did, had anything he had done in exchange for cooperating against the Chrisleys. The investigation took just absolutely forever. The government investigated the Chrisleys for 7 years before they finally filed charges in 2019. The feds charged Todd and Julie Chrisley and also their accountant, Peter Tarantino. The case went to trial in 2022 in the Northern District of Georgia. Over the course of 3 weeks, the government called 27 witnesses, including 2 FBI agents. The defense called 16 witnesses, including Faye Chrisley, Todd's mother, and Lindsay Chrisley, Todd's daughter. Now, calling Lindsay was probably a pretty serious mistake. We'll probably have to handle that another night. Todd and Julie and their accountant had the right not to testify, and all 3 elected not to testify. But the jury found them guilty on all 12 counts. So let's talk about those. What were those 12 counts? I did a chart for you so you can kind of understand the lay of the land, but it's not at before it remove other me. Okay, I've got to remove something from the screen. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here are the charges. You can see there are 12 of them, and I color coded them to make it a little easier for you. So that bluish green color that you see, that is the counts against both Todd and Julie. There was conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and then bank fraud against several different entities. There was Midtown Bank, Gulf South Private Bank, United Community Bank, RBC Bank USA, and Wells Fargo. They were also charged together jointly with tax evasion for the year 2015 with business identity with false information to the IRS. And then there were 2 charges that were just against Julie. Those were for wire fraud and obstruction of justice. We'll talk about what those were more specifically in a minute. And then there were charges they had together with their accountant, one charge with Peter Tarantino, and that was for conspiracy to defraud the U.S. through the IRS filings. And then there were 2 charges against just the accountant for aiding the filing of a false tax return. And so those were the charges, all 12 of them. But I want to talk about what those really mean, because of course let me remove that while I'm thinking about it. Okay, so we're going to go through each kind of group together. The first category being the bank fraud. Now, if you are new to the channel, we are really big into hearing both sides of the case. So be sure to stick around because you're also going to hear the Chrisleys side. But let's start with what the government said happened. This is bank fraud, and it was the biggest set of charges. The government said that the Chrisleys used falsified documents to get loans that they did not qualify for. They said Todd and Julie, and they had Braddock's help. Braddock is the witness, the former partner of Todd, who inflated account balances, submitted false financial statements, forged audit paperwork, all to make themselves look richer so that they would be able to secure millions of dollars in loans. You know how when you get a loan, you have to tell the bank how much money you have, how much money you make, and they decide whether it's worth it, whether you would be worth taking that risk on. And in this particular case, the government says they faked those documents to make it look like they qualified for loans they didn't really qualify for. And for a lot of these loans, they had to resubmit each year to prove they were still able to get those loans, still qualified to get those loans. So, and let's go through some examples of what the government said had happened. According to what the government said, Mark Braddock sent one of the banks a personal financial statement that claimed that Todd Chrisley had $4 million in a Merrill Lynch account. And what the bank wanted, they wanted the information so they could either make or continue loans to Todd. But according to what the bank and the government said, the bank asked for proof, said, show us that you really have $4 million in that Merrill Lynch account. And that was a problem, according to the government, because Todd didn't have that much in the account. So Braddock said Braddock created a fake document that showed that Todd Chrisley had an account at Merrill Lynch that had $776,509.52 in it. And he sent that fake document, or prepared it, sent it to Todd. And Todd said, you're an effing genius. Just make it show 4 million, because that was apparently what they said they had. Now, the government said that claim, and this was the testimony from Braddock, the government said that claim was really bold, not just because Todd didn't have that much in Merrill Lynch, but because he didn't have an account there at all. He didn't even have an account. And that he finally opened one a year later, but the account never had more than $17,000 in it. The government said Todd knew all about this fake document, and their proof was this email that Todd supposedly wrote to Braddock. The government said this shows Todd is approving of faking documents, and he knew exactly how much they were faking too. He made sure it was worth even more. So next example, in 2008, a bank asked for updated financial information, and Braddock wasn't sure what to send. So he went to Todd asking, what do we tell this bank? What do we send to them? And Braddock said Todd told him, create the financials like you always have. And the government said, again, this shows Todd knew the financial documents he was submitting were false. Now, example 3, according to the government, as I mentioned, every year Todd was having to update some of these financials. And in 2009, the government says that Mark Braddock and Todd got kind of lazy, and they sent in the exact same statement that had been sent in the year before. Now, I don't know who it was who sent it in, Braddock or Braddock and Todd, but it was the exact same statement. So, and by that, I mean, the cash was exactly the same. The securities were exactly the same. The real estate was exactly the same. And that looked kind of odd to the bank. And someone from the bank called and said, well, this looks a lot like the one you filed 8 months ago in December of 2008. And, it's funny that the cash, the securities, the real estate all add up to the penny. So the bank rep said he wanted to avoid questions from people higher up who would say, what's up with this? How could this be exactly the same? So the government said Todd then wrote to Braddock and said, bring the securities down significantly. In other words, the government said Todd knew that all of this was just more or less a fake. So then fourth example, according to the government, Julie Chrisley participated in all of this. For example, the government said that she sent Mark Braddock a check that posted in February of 2012. But she told him to change the post date so that it would look like the money had been in the account for several months, that it had been in the account since November of 2011, even though it was really deposited in February of 2012. And then the last point they had against Julie directly was a time when the family needed to lease a house in California, and the government said Julie sent fake bank documents so the family would qualify and could get the lease. All of these documents, the government said, proved the Chrisleys were very intentionally engaged in a scheme to defraud banks and to get millions of dollars in loans that they didn't qualify for. Or in Julie's case, of course, to get a lease. The government said it all worked just fine until it didn't. According to the government, the Chrisleys convinced the banks to give them big loans, and that worked until the Chrisleys couldn't pay. They didn't have enough money, and they also did not have enough collateral to cover the various loans, and they declared bankruptcy. So that meant the banks were left holding the bag, and they didn't have the security they thought they did to justify the loans that had been made to the Chrisleys. So the government claimed in this case that the Chrisleys had gotten about $20 million in loans that they were not entitled to. Hal, I am so glad to have you as a new member. Thank you for becoming a member. Neuropsych Xena suggests we set politics aside during this hour, and I completely agree with that. I find the case interesting on lots of levels. I hope y'all will as well. Glenda has been a member for 15 months. That's awesome. Thank you, Glenda. My goodness, Bob Bates coming in with a huge super sticker. Thank you so much. And I see there are actually two. I'll put your first one up, but thank you, Bob. I really appreciate that. So let's talk now about what the Chrisleys' response was to all of this. It will not be surprising to you that the Chrisleys put a lot of the blame, all of it really, on Mark Braddock. They said he was the mastermind behind all of this. In fact, he was the person behind all of this, that the Chrisleys did not know about this. And that since they had fired him, He was just going for revenge. That's all he was in this for. The Chrisleys said it's no coincidence that he was the one who created the documents, that he was the one who produced the key emails, that he was doing all of this because he wanted to take down Todd. Now, there was even a claim from Braddock that he and Todd had been lovers and that he had been rejected. Todd's lawyer said that was completely false, utterly made up. Braddock was not exactly a sympathetic figure at trial. He had to admit that he had perjured himself before. And even the government acknowledged that he wasn't that great a guy necessarily. The prosecutor told the jury, you should hate the fact that Mark Braddock got immunity. You shouldn't like that. You shouldn't trust Mark Braddock. But the government said Braddock was not the whole story. They said that the fraud did not stop when he left. And that was evidence, according to the government, that the Chrisleys were not just bystanders, that they were participants. Now, the Chrisleys also had their very own star witness, a former employee who testified that she helped him falsify documents to harm the Chrisleys. Donna Cash worked for Todd Chrisley's asset management company, and she took the stand on behalf of the Chrisleys. Now, according to MovieWeb, Donna Cash testified that Braddock told her to commit financial fraud with him in order to ruin Todd Chrisley's life. In other words, exactly what the Chrisleys and their attorney was telling the jury. That Braddock had her send fake financial documents to loan companies and to lie about how well the company was doing financially. She said she watched him, Braddock, delete emails about the finances of the business and also any messages that banks were trying to get through to Todd Chrisley. She said that Braddock asked her to tell Chrisley that his 2009 taxes had been all paid when in fact they had not been paid. She said she had a change of heart when she realized that the Chrisleys were on vacation and they were about to lose their home to foreclosure. And she felt really badly. She called the Chrisleys and she came clean. So this sounds like really great testimony for the Chrisleys. So what went wrong here? Why did it not sway the jury? Well, obviously we can't say for absolutely sure, but we do know that the government cross-examined Cash by pointing out a couple of key points. The first was that even though Cash had just told Todd Chrisley and Braddock that she and Braddock were trying to defraud the Chrisleys, that Todd Chrisley kept both of them on as employees. And the government said, why would he do that if they were trying to cheat him? And secondly, even after Braddock left, Donna Cash admitted she created 2 more fake invoices to suggest that the Chrisleys had actually incurred a business expense when in fact all they had was estimates for it. So in the end, the Donna Cash's testimony apparently did not sway the jury on this point. So separate from the loans, the government said, of course, that the Chrisleys had been dodging taxes. That was one of the charges. Now, the first allegation was that they didn't file returns or make timely payments in some years. This became hugely controversial after the trial when an IRS agent admitted that she had been wrong about her testimony on the stand. If there's interest, we can talk about how the Chrisleys, in my opinion, came pretty close to winning a significant issue on appeal. The IRS agent told the jury that the Chrisleys had not paid their taxes. As it turned out, they had paid money toward their taxes, and the IRS had put it in the wrong account. Now, they had only paid right before trial started or fairly close in time to that, but the payments were there and the testimony to the jury was incorrect. So the second allegation was that they had hidden income from the IRS, that they had moved a production company, their production company, which they called 7 C's, the letter C, that they had moved it under the name of Todd's mother, Nanny Faye. And the reason the government claimed they did that was because they wanted to avoid paying taxes on that income. But Nanny Faye, the government said, didn't really run that production company. She didn't know anything about it. It was really Todd and Julie. So third allegation was that in March 2017, they claimed they couldn't pay a 2009 tax bill. But three months later, they received a payment for $300,000 in that 7C's account. So it looked like 7C's was making no money, and the implication from the government was they were holding off on receiving income so they could not pay taxes on it. So now, as I said, their accountant, Peter Tarantino, was charged in all of this. He was convicted along with them. And I have not heard any mention of whether or not he might receive a pardon also. I have not heard anything about that. It didn't sound like he was. He only received about 3 years. So it is possible that he is about due to be out anyway, or pretty close to, maybe even already is done with his sentence by now. So category 3 would be those extra charges against Julie Chrisley. She was charged with wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and the government said she submitted a backdated document during the investigation that she changed the ownership of 7C's Productions from Nanny Faye to Julie. They argued this document was never really given to the bank and that it was just an effort to cover up fraud. And the jury did convict Julie on that count. So all told, and let me say thank you again to Bob. I really appreciate that super chat. There are 3 now. Thank you, Bob. So they were, the jury said that Todd and Julie Chrisley were guilty on all 12 counts. Now, at the sentencing hearing, they asked for mercy because they had adopted their son's child who was still very young, that they wanted to help care for Todd's mother, who was elderly, Nanny Faye. But they did not in any way acknowledge guilt. They continued to say they were not guilty. The judge wasn't at all sympathetic to the arguments about their child, Chloe. She gave them both really hefty sentences. Todd, as I said, 12 years, and Julie, originally about 7.5 years. She won an issue on appeal, and it got reduced to about 7 years. They also were ordered to pay $17 million in restitution. One of the questions I've had that I have not seen answered anywhere, did they pay that? Have they already paid that, or did they pay any part of it? I don't see anything that would suggest they would get that money back if they have paid it, but it may be that they haven't paid that in any way yet. So as I said, they started their sentences January 2023 at 2 separate prisons. Todd was in Florida. Julie was in Kentucky. It wasn't entirely clear why they got sent to separate states. Julie was initially going to be in Florida, and obviously that would have been easier for the family. But it may be because Julie was put into a medical facility prison, and she had had a history of cancer. So that may have been why. So the Chrisleys, now that they're out, as I said, Todd and his daughter, Savannah, not wife Julie, she wasn't there, but there was a press conference today. And during that press conference, it was very clear that the Chrisleys are not backing down at all from their claim that they are not guilty. Here's what they had to say. Here's what Todd had to say. As I said, Julie was not present.
Mr. Chrisley, do you have any remorse for the actions that led to the victims?
Oh, you must be CNN. Do I have any remorse? I would have remorse if it was something that I did.
Well, your wife did apologize last year.
Well, let me explain to you how that works, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You're placed in a position as a defendant to either bow down and kiss the ass of the Department of Justice and accept responsibility for things that you did not do in order to avoid a stronger sentence.
So fairly clear there what he's saying about that. When Julie was resentenced to the slightly lower amount, she at that point did apologize. And so the questioner is saying, well, does that mean, she acknowledges what's happened, or that you acknowledge it? And they also asked, do you have any remorse? Todd's answer, no, because I would have remorse if I had done that. I didn't do it. And also, obviously, thinking that the only reason his wife had to take that position or admit anything was just because that's the way sentencing is. And there is truth to that the judges expect that and penalize a failure to take responsibility. Todd had extraordinarily harsh words for the prosecutors in his case. Here's what he said.
Well, if you will look at the individuals that prosecuted this case and that lied to the courts, and these prosecutors are no longer with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Tommy Krepp left and is now at the FDIC. Annalise Peters, she is now with Meta. You don't go to Meta and give up a career as a prosecutor. That's not what you do. You don't go to the graveyard of the FDIC when you're trying to build a career as a defense attorney. Now,
I don't know what he means by saying that they lied to the courts. I personally felt pretty strongly about the Chrisleys argument about the IRS agent, but I'm not aware of any lying to the courts. But I will say this about going to a job at Meta might pay a great deal more than being a federal prosecutor. So I can see where someone might do that. The FDIC might be something the person preferred. I don't see any sense in the fact that they went to those jobs that means they were being punished in any way, or that they had to leave or were unsuccessful in their jobs. So, but clearly Todd Chrisley is upset about what happened. He clearly continues to believe that the prosecutors, prosecuted him unjustly and should not have done that. Savannah was equally adamant that they were not guilty. And I just want to say for a minute, this young woman has done an extraordinary amount of work to get her parents out. She went very wisely about it and accomplished something really rare. So yeah, here's what she had to say.
So what do I do? I was like, okay.
Oh, wait, got to move.
Give up a career as a prosecutor.
There we go.
That's not what you do. You don't go to the graveyard of the FDIC when you're trying to build a career as a defense attorney. So
I also think it's very important to note that it took 7 years to issue a formal indictment.
Exactly.
So the investigation was going on for almost a decade. And when you look at it, our judge was the youngest African-American female appointed by Obama. So she allowed so many things to come into trial with the Fourth Amendment violations, and magistrate judge ruled that all the evidence must be thrown out because it was obtained illegally. So we don't know if stuff was planted. Mark Braddock was involved. He got full immunity from the government. So the whole trial was just messy and tainted. And
now, what she's there was an issue related to a change in what evidence was going to come in at the trial. Initially, some of the evidence from a search was going to be excluded, and it ended up coming into trial. So that's what she's referring to. We can talk about that in more detail if people are really interested in this case and would like to know more. Todd specifically said that both believed that Todd had been targeted. Here's what they said about that.
when magistrate judge ruled that evidence was not allowed in, the Obama appointed judge said, nope, I don't care. We're allowing it all in.
And with an email that said, we need to catch a big fish. And the response was, well, Todd Chrisley is the biggest fish in Atlanta right now.
And I think it's also important to note that the Office of Inspector General ruled in our favor in their documents that in their investigation that stated, we agree that the Chrisleys were unfairly targeted. We substantiate
Due to their celebrity status.
Yes, we substantiate the Chrisleys' claims that they were unfairly targeted. So at the end of the day, I will sit and say, as his daughter, I believe in law and order. If I believe that my parents did exactly what they were accused of doing, then yes, you have a consequence for it. Do I think the consequence should have been 12 years? No, I do not. That's not even a fair sentence if it was true. But I know in my heart of hearts it was not true. I caught these prosecutors in so much misconduct, speaking to the judge, having ex parte communications. And
this is in writing.
It is in writing.
So, as I said, pretty harsh words for the prosecutors. They clearly believe they were targeted. They are not backing down in any way from the statements that they made about that. So, as I said, assuming there's interest, then there's more we can cover with this case. If you're interested in learning about how they almost won their appeal and about the IRS agent and what the IRS agent did, then we can get more into that. So, all right, I will, let's see. I'll take just a couple of questions tonight. If you have a question, if you would put your question marks at the beginning, it'll help me spot it in the chat. And try not to be political. We're trying to focus on the legal part of the case. So if you have that, let me know. And I want to say thank you again very much to Bob Bates. Thank you for those very generous super stickers, all three of them. Okay, so I'm not going to give, aside Carmina asking, aside from immunity and witness protection, what can prosecutors offer people to cooperate? Well, those are the two biggest things that are normally offered is particularly immunity if the person was involved, or witness protection if they weren't, but might be a target because of the way they testify. There isn't necessarily a lot that can be offered. Now, some of the critique of what was given to Braddock was, and it seemed to be even from the prosecutors, was that maybe he was given immunity too early, and maybe he wasn't required to have some consequences for what he had done. That's what the prosecutors seem to be arguing to the jury is, you don't have to like him. You don't have to think it's fair that he's getting away with this, but Todd shouldn't, even if Mark did. So that was sort of the argument and the way that the prosecutor approached it. All right. Matt Peterson, should they have been pardoned? They were clearly guilty. So Matt, those are two different questions. And one of the things we could get into in another video would be sort of how the president gets to pardon, what some of the factors are. It's under Article 2 of the Constitution, gives the president the authority to do that, to pardon somebody. And it actually assumes guilt. The person doesn't have to be innocent. It's a power given to the president, even if the person is guilty. So it's unusual in that regard. Kim Coe asked, do you think the Chrisleys are guilty? There seemed to be a good amount of evidence, but I was really concerned about the IRS agent. That whole thing seemed very, I felt like they probably needed a new trial after that. So that's what I would have expected. There were serious questions around the procurement of evidence too in a search, and whether or not they went too far, whether or not the search was done properly. The Savannah Chrisley was mentioning a change in the ruling. That's normal. The judge doesn't have to follow a ruling by the magistrate, but that is an issue that lurked in the case. Loretta Powell, Mama is asking about Princess Spencer. I'm not sure what that is, Mama Pinks. You have to give me, you can't be cryptic with me. You have to give me the full out question. I will never know. Oh, okay. Kyrie is saying she would be interested in learning more about this case. Thank you. I appreciate your input very much. And thank you for the super chat. Linda asking me, the pardon czar in Trump's cabinet said the Chrisleys were indeed guilty, but that the punishment was too harsh, and that's why they were pardoned. It was pretty harsh. Now, from the government's perspective, they believed that these documents showed $20 million of fraud against the banks. It particularly seemed harsh to me as related to Julie, because she had a lot less involvement. At least, Todd was writing back and forth, but frankly, her involvement seemed pretty minimal. And so a 7-year sentence for that did seem pretty high. I have not read exactly what she said. I saw one comment by it. It didn't specifically mention what you said, but if you would send that to me, I'd like to know exactly what she said, because I would include that in another video. So thank you. T. Barnard, what monumental thing did the daughter accomplish? Not familiar with the case. Probably came in right as I was saying that. She got a pardon from President Trump, and it took a lot of work, and it took a lengthy period of very careful and focused attention to getting that done. It was not something that happened by accident or easily. And I would say Todd had some words about that in the press conference, saying that it was pretty humbling as a parent. He was so grateful, but it was also really difficult to accept that kind of help from your child, because it didn't seem like your child ought to be taking care of you. You're supposed to be taking care of them. So I thought that was some pretty insightful words he had there. All right, wait, did I just pass some questions? I'm not sure. I'm looking for questions quickly. There is, what impressed you the most about the case? Freddie's cat asked. I think it would probably be the emails that were sent between Todd and Mark Braddock, as far as for the government and for the defense. It would, without question, be that IRS statement that got made from the IRS agent on the stand. I thought that was I thought that was a pretty good grounds for their appeal. They didn't win their appeal. Julie won a little bit and got a slightly reduced sentence, but they did not win on the bigger issues that they wanted to win on. And they did not get a new trial, but they've been pardoned. What did you think about what the daughter said about the judge? I remember what she said about the prosecutors. Oh, yeah, those are pretty harsh words. I will tell you that it's very, I think it's inadvisable to critique a judge or the prosecutors in a case. And I say that from being within the system as a lawyer, that I think it's better not to do that. So that if she came to me, I would say, don't do that again. No critique of the judge. And they did spend a lot of the press conference talking about what they planned to do as a family, how they planned to work on the justice system, in the justice system, to try to get improvements for prisoners. I think that's a great opportunity for them. That would be really a unique and a great way for them to go and to take this. And I hope they really will do that. I don't think that gets helped with comments about the judge and about her being young and appointed by Obama and things like that. I didn't see anything wildly crazy that the judge did, especially given this point. They were affirmed by the appellate court. So what the judge did was affirmed. So you have to say, well, it wasn't just the judge. It was people over the judge. I made the statement early on that IRS agent issue, that bothers me. So would I have made a different decision? Maybe, but I just think it's safer not to ever critique a federal judge or a state judge if you can possibly help it. That is my personal philosophy. And I say that with a fair amount of experience under my belt, not in critiquing judges, but just in general. Okay, S. Mickey's Mouse. So if pardoned, do they still have a felony record? And that's a great question. Savannah made some statements about how this would be the fullest pardon and a complete pardon and so forth. Typically, a pardon doesn't erase what happened. It takes away the punishment for what happened. So the punishment ends, which is why I had some questions around whether or not they had already paid money as part of the fine of $17 million. And if so, I don't think they would get that back, but I was real curious about that. All right, what's the next step for this family? Can the husband be prosecuted for slander in his public statements recently? Very messy, says Karen K. I don't think so. I don't, there's nobody who would probably sue him for that. You might be referring to what the prosecutor said. I just don't think that's very likely in this situation, but I would definitely advise them because I think they have a potential really important platform here to actually reach back and help people in prison, to advocate for changes that they think are important. None of that gets helped by statements about the prosecutor or statements about the judge. It just doesn't help. Do you think they should not be doing press? Does it put a target on their back again? Kimco asked. Well, to me, the answer is that they're doing the press because they lead very public lives. I think they might as well do a press conference. And they not only lead public lives, they want to lead public lives. Todd's already mentioning the next show, how he might get involved again. And so that would be a place. He doesn't really have a way to hide it, and he doesn't seem to want to hide. So I don't think there's anything wrong in this particular case with the press conference. All right. Well, we will be live again Monday night at 7 p.m. and I will look forward to seeing you all then. And don't forget to like and subscribe.